Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Mike Allen. Mike is an author of, of from the horror genre, and he is also an editor. And today I'll be talking to him mostly about him being an editor. Um, and could you tell us a little bit about yourself first, Mike?
Sure. First, thank you very much for having me on.
Thank
I'm
you.
very flattered to get this invitation. So, uh, I have been, I suppose, involved in the speculative fiction field in some way or another for more than 30 years. Although probably not that many people knew I was involved until something more like 20 to 25 years ago, So, and not entirely coincidental to that. This year, 2023, is the 25th anniversary of Mythic Delirium, a publishing venture that I founded. Uh, I guess that would have been in 1998. And at the
Mhm.
time, Mythic Delirium was the name of a little poetry zine that I published twice a year. Now we go by Mythic Delirium Books. My wife Anita is also a part of it. I have an assistant, Sydney Macias, who has been very valuable to me in these more recent years. And we publish fantasy books, although I use the word fantasy as kind of a shortcut because what we really tend to specialize in books that are kind of hard to categorize, that's for better or for worse, that has been what has interested me the most is trying to create homes for things that might have a difficult time in our ever more sort of commercial categories. Uh, so, but I didn't actually start out uh, planning to become an editor and a publisher. I really just had sort of plain old writer ambitions, and I have accomplished some of those things too. I was a Nebula Award finalist in 2009 for a horror story I wrote called The Button Bin, and I have been a finalist for the Shirley Jackson Award a couple of times since then for my writing. As an editor and publisher, I've been a finalist twice for the World Fantasy Award. So, for what all that is worth, I ended up being sort of a jack of all trades, within esoteric publishing, within speculative fiction.
That's great. So, for readers unfamiliar, uh, okay,
I'm still here. Can you hear me? I
out.
meant to do that.
Yes, your horror writing did that. The ghosts decided they were going to come into the picture.
Right, right, right.
Okay. Um, so for readers unfamiliar with the type of work you do, could you describe what it is that you really do?
When I began Mythic Delirium in 1998, as I mentioned, I was publishing a poetry zine twice a year, and even then, it was a little offbeat, in that I attempted for a while to sort of focus on formal poetry, which is not what one does if one is trying to sort of endear oneself to what's considered the poetry community in this day and age. Eventually I loosened up and didn't and just worried, focus more on interesting poetry. I didn't try and restrict it by whether or not it was formal, but uh through that venture, I went all kinds of really surprising places. I Mythic Delirium ended up getting picked up by a company called DNA Publications. They DNA Publications no longer exists, but at the time, they were the publisher of Weird Tales magazine
Oh, okay.
and some other uh, some other titles that you could actually go into a Barnes and Noble and find on the newsstands. And so Mythic Delirium itself never appeared on the newsstands, but knowledge of it kind of spread far and wide because of promotion within these sister magazines.
Hmm.
And so I ended up getting to publish work by Jane Yolen and Ursula K. Le Guin and Neil Gaiman and Joe Haldeman and Ken Liu and on and on and on. And so uh, the networking that built from that put me in a position that when I decided I wanted as an editor to focus on fiction, I was able uh, I was in a pretty good place for launching that, and so I working with Noralana Books, which is another company. I believe Noralana is still around, but it's no longer publishing this sort of thing. Working with Noralana Books, I launched the Clockwork Phoenix anthology series, and the first Clockwork Phoenix volume came out in 2009. Interesting. That was the same year that I was a Nebula finalist. It was interesting for as a writer. It was interesting that all worked out together. And uh, I did 3 volumes of Clockwork Phoenix with Noralana Books, and then circumstances uh, circumstances came together such that uh, I had to decide whether I wanted to continue the series on my own without, another publisher as a partner. And I did that, and I held a Kickstarter that was successful for the 4th volume. Clockwork Phoenix 4 is what it was called. And the funding from that Kickstarter essentially also created Mythic Delirium Books,
Oh,
the the
great.
the company that I run now. And uh, I produced one more volume of Clockwork Phoenix, and then I began venturing into single author collections. And the very first single author collection that Mythic Delirium Books published was Bone Swans by C.S.E. Cooney, who's an amazing, very lyrical fantasy author. And this was her debut short fiction collection, and it won the World Fantasy Award. So, so I took this as a sign that we were going in the right direction, and have continued to pursue that since. Uh, this year, as I mentioned, is our 25th anniversary year, and we kicked that off. We, myself, Anita, those affiliated with Mythic Delirium, by coming from Roanoke, Virginia, to Boscone in Boston, and we launched 2 new books by authors that we have worked with before. Uh, One of them is, let's see how well you can see this.
Yep, we can see
One
it.
one of them is The Twice Drowned Saint by C.S.E. Cooney, the author of Bone Swans that I mentioned earlier. This is a novel that is just as wildly imaginative and mind-bending as the stories in Bone Swans that did so well with the World Fantasy Award jury. And this one in particular is fun for us because it's fully illustrated. This is the first time we've managed to pull something like that off, where we have where we have the chapters illustrated throughout. So I can't help but show it off a little. Uh, but anyway,
Who's the
this is
illustrator?
his name is Lassie Paldanius, and Lasse, excuse me, and he's Finnish. We met him, as in Anita and I met him at Worldcon in Helsinki in 2017, and we worked with him some on with the Mythic Delirium zine at that point. That at that point the zine was still publishing, and this is kind of a reunion. We brought him back into the fold to work on Claire's book. C.S.E. Cooney goes by Claire, uh, and the other book that we launched at Boscone. This was a pretty epic undertaking for us. Uh, this is The Collected Enchantments by Theodora Goss. And we also have kind of a long history of working with Dora. Dora Dora had a poem in one of the earlier issues of Mythic Delirium, the poetry zine, called Octavia is Lost in the Hall of Masks, that won the Rising Award for poetry. It was our first piece to win, a genre award. So, it's great to continue to work with her in book form. And the Collected Enchantments is a, a retrospective collection of her fiction and poetry going back many years, especially the work focused on fairy tales and folklore, which is a major passion and a major thread for Dora and in her writing. And it's a pretty epic sized book. It's uh, I wish I could remember the word count off the top of my head. It's not coming to me, but it's humongous. So if you're a fan of Dora Goss's work, this book is practically a one-stop shop for you. So it's really great for us that we had the opportunity to do this, and it was fun to launch them both at once at Boscone and have the authors there, uh, and and be able to kind of celebrate as a group and share that.
I do have to say though that I will be interviewing Dora and CSE Cooney
Wonderful,
for
wonderful.
separate in separate interviews. So they will probably be talking about those books in the interviews.
As
So
their publisher, I certainly hope so.
yeah, I would think so. Okay, so my next question is, what draws you to this particular genre and or style that you're editing, and what do you think draws readers to these kinds of books?
So this is an interesting conundrum for me because as we mentioned earlier in this interview, as a writer and to some degree as a reader, if I'm kind of left to my own devices to pick my own entertainment, I'm very, very into horror. But as a publisher, not so much. Uh, I think that stems from an interest I had in the interest I had in poetry that caused me to
Mm,
launch Mythic Delirium, the poetry zine, way back at the beginning of all this. Uh, Claire and Dora are both very prolific poets, and that's
mhm.
how I was first introduced to their work. And so, as I've evolved as a publisher and uh, ventured into fiction, uh, I've still been drawn to uh, that poetic quality, and even if it's in prose, and not that there isn't scary horror poetry. There most definitely is.
Oh, yes.
But so I mean, Mythic Delirium, the zine was very kind of was I it wasn't really my conscious goal to do this, but I think just putting the word mythic in the title, attracted attracted maybe a higher volume than normal of mythological and folklorish type
Hmm.
topics.
Hmm.
And 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 so and so my palette as a publisher, is developed based on that. And I think somebody I would like to think, not that I don't know that there's anybody who has bothered to do this, but I would like to think that somebody who like made a study of what I published in Mythic Delirium, the magazine, and then made a study of what I published in the Clockwork Phoenix anthologies, uh, which really had the with Clockwork Phoenix, I really kind of pushed a lot of boundaries in terms of story forms and story forms and narrative techniques and etc., which is something you really kind of see more often in poetry, that kind of experimentation. But there was also a heavy thread of ha ha ha, ha I did it again.
Here come the ghosts
Yeah,
again.
yeah, yeah. Well, there was also a heavy thread of mythology, folklore, etc. And uh I think this imaginary student of the product of Mythic Delirium that I would imagine that I am imagining would find that consistent in the books that we're doing now. Claire Cooney's Bone Swans, has a lot of conversations going with Brothers Grimm fairy tales, but at the same time, very very much includes her own wild invention. uh, and Theodora Goss, her work in the collected enchantments and the previous collection that we did with her, Snow White Learns Witchcraft. Uh, I think Jane Linskold, an author who's a friend of mine, reading through the collected enchantments, described it as kind of a call and response with all of European folklore.
Sounds good. So what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and, well, not writing, but what was the biggest challenge that you had in putting out your latest two books? Did you have a really big challenge?
Well, I did. I have to think how to express it gingerly. So, uh, I used to be employed in the news business,
Right.
and uh, my in my final year in the news business, I was the editorial page editor for the newspaper that I worked for. And I'm very proud that I got to do that. But uh the amount you're probably aware of how uh the current economy has not been very kind to newspapers, and newspaper owners themselves, these large, conglomerates that are purchasing newspaper chains, are not managing them well. So,
Mhm.
that's an aspect that I feel is not talked about as much as it should be. That the newspaper industry could be in better shape. I'm not saying,
Mhm.
I'm not saying a comeback is necessarily in the works, but it could be in much better shape with better management. And uh, I was in a situation where I was doing the work of what used to be a five-person team. And so it was very, very difficult for me to make any time, to work on this beloved personal business. And these books that I've just described to you are books that really needed a lot of hands-on time, and it was very hard to do that. So that was my personal biggest challenge. You may
Mhm.
have meant that question more in terms of you may have meant that question more in terms of outreach of awareness. I'm not
Not
sure.
necessarily.
Okay, okay. So there is I have some I think it's okay for me to say this. You know, I definitely did not have time to kind of storm around, the speculative fiction, social media, watering holes, shaking the tree.
Hmm.
So, so it is my hope that the interest in Theodore Egas and C.S.E. Cooney and Mythic Delirium's good fortune in general, is deep enough that people are going to come check these very special books out. Take pity on a poor overworked publisher and you know come by.
Now, was there any book that you particularly absolutely love working on? I mean, I know you loved working on all of them,
Oh,
but was there
sure.
any one that really, really stood out for you?
So I mean, I love them all. uh,
Right,
you
right.
know
I know
I
that.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't a book that I haven't made mention of is CSE Cooney's second uh short story collection that I did, Dark Breakers, which uh which came out at the beginning of 2022 in what I would still kind of call a dark COVID time. Of course, the beginning of 22 was dark for other reasons as well, that caused some distractions. And that is obviously, I'm already proud of Bone Swans because that was Claire's debut and we did so well with it. And it was great to revisit her the creative well that she crafts these wild stories from, and uh show how show how she's continued to grow and explore this very neat direction of storytelling that is uniquely hers. I will say, I guess I can get away with saying this because Claire has talked about this publicly. There is an original novella in Dark Breakers called Salice's Laundries, and uh, it's based on um, it's based on I believe, Lord help me if I'm wrong. I believe the writer's name was Nellie Bly, who in at toward the end of the 19th century did an expose on asylums in and uh, and the she modeled it on that journalistic work. And when I read it, I felt, as a journalist myself, that there were elements of it that did not quite ring true yet. And so I asked Claire to watch the movie Spotlight. If you're
Mhm.
familiar at all with that, it stars it
No.
so Spotlight, it won an Oscar for Best Picture. It's based on the investigative team at the Boston Globe that uh, exposed the widespread problem with child abuse in the Catholic
Oh,
Church.
yeah.
And it's has an amazing cast. Michael Keaton, Rachel McAdams, and uh, you know, everything that happens in that movie. I have personally experienced some version of it, not necessarily for a story as high stakes as what they were working on, but every situation from to me was familiar. And so I suggested that Clara watch it as a way of kind of seeing how some of the things that she was trying to convey, you genuinely work, or at least as close. I don't want to say a work of fiction is like 100% accurate, but close enough to perhaps inform another work of fiction. And she did that, and she rewrote Salisay's Laundries, and what she came back with was just amazing. So that's a thing that I'm very proud of, both for the work itself, and for my ability to assist with it as an editor. And I should mention Salisay's Laundries is actually free to read on mythicdelirium.com. We made it available, so you can
Wonderful.
check it out for yourself.
Great. Okay, thank you. Um, okay, so what else can we expect from you in the near future?
Actually, so Mythic Delirium's kind of a small operation. If we put out one or two books a year, that's kind of our standard. So for us to do more than that, we must really be trying hard to do something like, celebrate an anniversary. And the next book coming out from Mythic Delirium will be the debut collection from Yukimi Ogawa. She's a Japanese writer who's been published in Strange Horizons and Clark's World and the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, and in Clockwork Phoenix and Mythic Delirium, when Mythic Delirium for a while was also the magazine publishing fiction. And that book is called Like Smoke, Like Light. And at the moment, this is what it looks like. like this is this is the manuscript that I have recently gone through, and I need to get my edits back to Yukimi so that we can create ARCs and get those out to reviewers. But the plan for now is to have that out in June, and that is, I guess, a continuation of this celebration. And worth mentioning, Yukimi's work, like I described earlier, for example, with Barbara's, she's another writer who you'll find ghosts and folklore and science fiction elements all in the same story. So you know
Okay,
we're
great.
consistent.
Okay, great. Okay, now I have some questions about you on being an editor.
Oh,
What's your favorite part about being an editor on the whole editing and publishing process?
well, I think uh, there are sort of two things. I mean, there can be many things, but I just talked about uh, you know uh, Claire's novella Salisay's Laundry, and how I Salisay's Laundries, and how I was delighted to be able to help to help her make that story into more of what she was aiming for in the first place. So
Hmm.
that's delightful. And I also Mythic Delirium on the whole has had very good luck when it comes to the stories and poems and books that we produce, landing on awards shortlists and best of the year shortlists, and getting stories reprinted in best of the year and anthologies, and sometimes even winning one of those awards that they end up on the shortlist for. And I get all kinds of vicarious thrills out of that when that happens. It's just delightful to me. you know
Wow,
that,
that's great. That's
that
great.
thank you.
So what's been your favorite adventure during your whole editing career or publishing career?
Wow. Okay. So there have been many. Uh, you know, I
I don't
really,
think we have 5 hours.
right. No, yeah. You probably noticed that I can kind of I'm a very introverted person, but once I get rolling on something, I can kind of go and go and go.
That's
So,
great.
well, I'm going to circle back to something that I've already mentioned, which is
Yeah.
when Bone Swans
Hmm.
won the World Fantasy Award,
Okay.
because Anita and I and Claire and a number of our mutual friends and Claire's, I'm not sure that they were married yet. Claire's future husband Carlos, I guess they can yell at me if I'm wrong about the date there. But he was also present. Carlos Hernandez, who's a pretty well established author in his own right, and it's funny, Claire and Carlos, they have a website called Hearn and Dooney, which is the two of them together doing things, and it's so delightful. But so we're all at the World Fantasy Award ceremony, and none of us have paid to take part in the banquet. So if you've ever actually been to one of these ceremonies, you have all the banquet tables that are kind of arrayed in front of the guest speakers, and then there's like a couple rows, like then there's like a couple rows like off to the side where all the people who either couldn't afford to or were too cheap to, or whatever combination, didn't pay to eat the catered food, sit to hear about the results. And um and so, as it turned out, at that ceremony, the only two winners at the 2016 ceremony who were actually present to walk up and give a speech were in our group. Uh, so
Uh,
first it was John O'Neill with Blackgate magazine, who won a special award, and then Claire won for Bone Swans.
oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and Claire was convinced that there was just no chance, because she was up against some pretty astonishing nominees. So she had not prepared a speech. But Claire is trained in professional theater, so that wasn't really a problem for her. She was able to get up there and get a speech. But then, she had kind of a moment where she came down off the stage afterward and was clearly kind of overwhelmed, and we all swarmed up there to, collect her and bring her back to the row. And yeah, it was really, really delightful to be able to experience that in person. I think, that remains, well, many, many cool things have happened to me, in the course of this publishing journey. That's still, to my mind, the peak.
I would imagine that would be the most incredible thing.
Oh, it was
So, what's the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your editing publishing
the greatest lesson.
career?
Possibly that I possibly that is, I can never assume that I actually know it all. There's the publishing landscape is changing pretty constantly, and
It is.
I'm still most of my best tricks were learned around 2014, 2015. So I'm now kind of, now, even though, I'm celebrating 25 years as a publisher, I'm still very much kind of learning how it's done. Uh, there's, I can tell you that, I can also tell you that, for a writer, there's many lessons to be learned from, being an editor of other writers. um, you
Well,
know,
can you elaborate a little bit?
well, let's see. How can I?
At least one thing, maybe.
Right. Okay. So I threw that out there, and now I need to come up with a specific example. Uh, and and I'm afraid I can only. It'll occur to me like after the interviews ends or something. But I know that uh, I learn a lot of techniques from kind of observing what others do,
Hmm.
and am able to kind of reflect that in my own writing. Uh, it's tough. It's a little tough for me to translate. It's a little tough for me to translate directly because, for example, I'm obviously a very different writer from Theodore Goss. Uh, it might be easier to explain if I rewind back to say the Clockwork Phoenix anthologies,
Okay.
the most recent of which came out in 2016, I guess it was. And I did in those anthologies, in have the privilege of including uh some horror stories that from other writers that ended up being very influential on me. The A specific example, I guess, that I could give would be from Clockwork Phoenix 2, all the way back in 2009, 2010. Uh, I included a story called Each Thing I Show You is a Piece of My Death, written by Gemma Files and her husband, Stephen Barringer, a wonderful collaboration. And she um, what they did, what they did was they created a horror story that unfolds almost entirely through court documents. It literally reads like a court file. But from this the sequence of the transcripts and the search warrant results and etc. This really really disturbing story emerges. At the time, at the time I had literally come off a stint as being a courts reporter, and and I remember just being sort of blown away by this, and being just sort of blown away by this, and kicking myself that I hadn't attempted something along these lines. And I did in some of my stories that followed afterward, that that had kind of a crime noir element to them, include include stuff from my court experience, not lifting
Mhm.
directly from court cases
Right.
I covered, but I loved I love sort of the added gritty realism or the illusion of such that this that of what Stephen and Gemma did, and snatched that idea for myself. So that's one example, I guess,
Hmm.
that I could give. Uh,
Okay. That's good. All right. So now I have some questions about you as a person.
okay.
Okay. So what is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
Well, this is interesting. So I've put a lot of what I am kind of out there. um, it's probably although it would be sort of obvious, I suppose, if you happen to be aware that I was the arts reporter for my newspaper for 10 years, that I have a pretty deep interest in I have a pretty deep interest in art history and 20th century art. Uh, and occasionally this is filtered into my writing, but it's not something that's front and center. In
Hmm.
fact, my wife and I just went to the Hirshhorn Museum in DC. It was a birthday trip for her in January to see the Yayoi Kusama exhibit. That's a Japanese artist, and she often creates these sort of mirror chambers. Uh, that she calls them infinity rooms.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
and in fact, I'm wearing a T-shirt right now that's related to a different exhibit. This might be a little dangerous. Let's see if you can read it. Can you see it?
Wow.
Uh, that was also at the Hirshhorn Museum. Um, I'm big into hiking. Of course, you could actually, if you read some of my fiction, you can probably figure some of that out because I've got a whole series. Like I've got a story called The Hiker's Tale. Uh, it's a little challenging for me to hike these days because I've managed to fairly severely injure both of my knees.
Oh,
Something that maybe not that many people know about me. Uh, let's see. Um, in recent years. Um,
well, that's probably good enough.
sure, yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm a metalhead, but I think a lot of people know that.
Oh,
I mean,
so,
I'm wearing the Who's a Mongolian folk metal band. That's the hat I have on for the interview. Yes.
okay.
We saw them live. We saw them live.
Really?
Yeah, we were only about 10 feet from them.
Oh,
It was really cool.
wow. Okay. So you already kind of answered a little bit about this, but what is or are your passions when you're not writing or editing? And how do you make time to do the things that you love?
Well, it's not easy because obviously I have, I guess if I were smarter, I would focus on one thing. But I'm spread out in all these multiple directions. Uh, so I mean, the truth is like writing, publishing, editing, that is what I love doing. So,
Mhm.
that's kind of my first choice to be doing, you know, in terms of like, in terms of like being active, that's maybe not always in health wise, that's maybe not always the best choice to be doing that 24/7. I have found, again, it's a little challenging. I mentioned my knee injuries, but I love, not just hiking, but kind of going on long walks. And
Mm.
the city where I live here in Roanoke has in recent years developed, I guess what you could call linear parks. They call them greenways, sort of long
Ah,
paved walking paths and bike paths throughout various parts of the city, and I've taken advantage of those quite a bit. And a lot of times those walks, some authors talk about, getting their best ideas when they're in the shower. The ghost struck
there,
again.
there they go again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So maybe the shower thing, inspired the ghost. But um, so a lot of authors will talk about showers, for example, when a lot of times when I'm out on a long walk and my all the sort of junk in my head kind of gradually works its way out, and then that's when I start having what I would say are my best ideas. uh, Also occasionally reproducible on a treadmill.
Okay. So when
So
you're active, that's when you come up with your best ideas.
right, right, right.
Wow. Okay. So what does your editing space look like and your writing space?
Well,
Are they the same?
you're looking at it.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
You're looking at it. Very cluttered. Um, very cluttered. But
Yes.
there are a lot of objects in this room that have some sort of sentimental value or are inspirational to me. in some way. I don't know how well you can see it, but to my right, uh, mounted on the bookshelf back there, you might be able to see a target,
Yes, sort of.
a handmade target, and there are actual bullet holes in that target, which I don't think you can see very well in this zoom, in this zoom image, but uh, Anita and I were at the home of an artist friend, and he is somebody who has guns and knows guns, and was letting me practice, because I wanted to be able to describe, I wanted to be able to describe using a gun, in my fiction, and
Mhm.
uh, and uh, that practice did end up feeding into my story, The Button Bin, which was the Nebula Award nominee, back in 2009 that I mentioned earlier. Um, there isn't a shootout, but a gun is fired. And I'm very proud of the description of that. uh that was garnered from that experience.
Research, good
Yeah.
research.
And so that's just one of the souvenirs. There are multiple you can't there are multiple Cthulhu dolls
Could
on the
see
shelf
those up
above
there. I was
me.
going to
Yeah,
mention
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Looks like a Cthulhu doll.
Right. And so, uh I think that the skepticism, about that exists now about the legacy of H.P. Lovecraft the person is definitely well deserved. But at the same time, there's no doubt that his creations have inspired a lot of people, even his critics. And I've had the privilege of being invited to create Cthulhu-ish tales more than once, and I've enjoyed doing that. So it's fun to have little Cthulhu's around.
Yeah. So when you're editing or writing, do you prefer music or silence? And if it's music, what kind?
Oh, well, either heavy metal or horror soundtracks.
Mm,
I'm especially fond of, I like the Hellraiser soundtracks. And of course I'm going to blank on the name of that composer, even though I know it. Chris somebody. Uh, and and I like John Carpenter's soundtracks, especially. He composes his own soundtracks for his films, and I've often listened to Prince of Darkness. Probably listened to that soundtrack way more often than I've rewatched that movie, even though I have rewatched that movie. Um, but I mentioned earlier I'm a metalhead. I love having, Judas Priest or Motorhead or Black Sabbath or whomever, playing in the background, as I work. And so some of my the story that I consider my oldest story that was fully successful, uh, is a piece called "Let There Be Darkness." That was published in the 90s, and was later, used by Pseudopod, the horror podcast. It was wonderful to have them pick that up, pick up this obscure piece from my very, very teeny small press nobody'd heard of me days, and broadcast it to a much bigger audience. And that story is essentially a transcription of the images that, appear in my head when I listen to the Slayer song South of Heaven. So,
hmm,
if you listen to
okay.
that, if you listen to that song and then read or listen to that story, I'd be kind of curious to hear whether you can pick up how they connect. Um,
Interesting. Okay. Now, um, writers and editors sometimes also have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to
Sure.
help them or hinder them with their work. And do you have any? And do they help or hinder you?
Yes. So, we've had, of course, my wife and I have been married for more than 30 years, and we've had, multiple, fur children. And at the moment, we only have one. Uh, we only have one, a cat. Her full name is Pandora, and
Ah,
a reasonably appropriate name. She's a calico. She is not in reach, or I would try to show it you to her, and she would probably resist being picked up. She's one of these. She's one of these cats that will like she'll resist being picked up, but then once you actually have her cuddling, she'll be super affectionate and purring. Whereas she used her sister, who alas has left us, who we called Persephone, uh,
oh,
would allow you to pick her up with absolutely no resistance, and then immediately try to get away with you. So they're like get away from you. So they have these opposite personalities in that effect. And so Pandora we call Dora for short, which
hmm.
which has caused some pretty amusing conversations with Dora Goss, you know,
Yeah,
who we work with very frequently. Uh,
can imagine.
yeah.
And does Pandora help or hinder you?
She is I would say that she provides emotional support. You
Okay.
she doesn't do anything that she doesn't interrupt me when I'm writing or things like that. A lot of times she will just uh like this is not the environment where this would happen, although there's a there's a sort of makeshift bed that is just out of view of the frame here that she likes to curl in, but she's not there right now. But when I'm writing on the couch and I have a laptop set up on one of our dinner trays, uh, which is I like to sometimes kind of move between the two spaces as a way to just sort of keep the brain going. And a lot of times, if I'm on the couch working, she just she snuggles right up next to me and just kind of stays there, making use, being affectionate or making use of the warm body, or however you want to characterize it. Uh,
A lot of times, one of my cats comes over if I'm on a Zoom call. He comes over and just puts his claw on my on my leg. It's like,
yeah, I've
pick
gotten
me up.
that treatment. I've gotten that treatment on occasion. Yeah, it's really funny when most of the time she doesn't do this, but sometimes you decide you need to move somewhere, or I decide put it in first person, I decide I need to move somewhere, and she decides she doesn't want me to, and that's when the little claw comes out.
They just know what they want.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, and I just have two more questions for you.
sure.
Um, One is where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester?
Well, for definitely check out Annie's Bookstop. Um, so the easiest place to find everything that I do as a publisher, and even a pretty big chunk of what I've done as an author, is to visit mythicdelirium.com online. And I will spell that for you because lots of people don't quite get it right. It is mythicdelirium.com. And
Okay.
you'll find what you will find there is links to where you can purchase Mythic Delirium books either directly from us, or out there on the World Wide Web, or through Bookshop, or what have you. And you will also find some of my books, such as, since I do have these in reach, we mentioned my horror writing chops. these are my main horror collections: Unseeming and Aftermath of an Industrial Accident, which are both Shirley Jackson Award nominees. And my one published novel to date, The Black Fire Concerto. All of those, you can find links for those at mythicdelirium.com. And you can also find, so I didn't really elaborate on this, and I don't want to go on too long about it, but Mythic Delirium, the magazine, had two stages. It was a print, for many years, it was a print zine that just published poetry. And then for about 5 years, it morphed into a digital magazine that published poetry and fiction. And the all of the digital issues remain archived online at mythicdelirium.com, free to read. So that's all there. And there's also, should you be interested, as interestingly, occasionally someone is, in a back issue of the print version of Mythic Delirium, the ones that are still available, you can buy them there. So that's kind of the one-stop shop. I have another website, which is called descentintolight.com. That's my personal homepage. Most of the content there is similar to what you find at mythicdelirium.com, but there's some extra stuff that's just about myself as a writer, and things that are going on there. Um, so and then, all of the titles that I have mentioned, you can find them, at least online wherever books are sold. And
At Annie's.
there are some brick and mortars like Annie's that carry them. So,
Yeah.
and if you have a favorite indie store and they don't have any of these books, you just ask them for it because they can get them.
Right, exactly. I mean, and I was going to also say, you can call Annie's at 508-796-5613, or email us at orders at anniesbooksworcester.com, and we can, for any of the books, and we can try and order them and try and get them for you.
Wonderful.
So, yeah. So my next and last question for you is, where can people find your work besides, I mean, we're sorry, how can we follow your work and share your
Sure.
awesomeness?
Well, thank you for phrasing it that way. So, um, I do have a Twitter presence. Not everybody is very happy with Twitter right at the moment.
Mm, no.
Uh, but it's Mythic Delirium, just like everything else. Like, I should change my name because Mythic Delirium is like so synonymous now with everything I do. But so I am there on Twitter, and not coincidentally, I have recently launched for the first time ever an Instagram account, which is also Mythic Delirium. And you can find me there. There's a few posts up there. I'm still kind of learning how to best use, and I'm pretty easy to locate on Facebook. Uh, although my Facebook address is Time Shark, which is a phrase from one of my poems. So, but if you go to descentintolight.com, the website, we're descending into light right now.
Yes, we are. We're
Yeah, yeah. If you go to
definitely descending.
if you go to Descent into Light, you'll find links to a lot of these social accounts I just mentioned, and the Instagram has a link tree. That's a new venture for me that has further links. So I don't know if it's even worth mentioning. I have a Patreon, but it's kind of dormant, so I'm not really advertising it at that much at the moment. It may get revived depending on some things that happen. I do have another novel coming out. It's called Trail of Shadows, from a small press called Broken Eye Books. It's a wonderful press, but uh, the the publication date is not yet set. So you'll have to visit one of these social media accounts or Descent into Light to see when that is happening. Uh, as of this month, if you don't mind, I do want to mention this. The magazine Cosmic Horror Monthly has brought out a new short story that I have written. This and this is to me, this is a very tongue-in-cheek title. It's called Slow Burn. The
Hmm.
story, however, is not very tongue-in-cheek. um, and this is so I mentioned that I've gotten to do some Lovecraft slash Cthulhu connected stories, and I have a story called The Sunsaw that appeared recently in an anthology put out by Chaosium called The Leaves of a Necronomicon. And I bring this up because Slow Burn in Cosmic Horror Monthly is actually the sequel to The
Oh,
Sunsaw. Though, luckily, whether it's luck or skill, I don't know, but the editors of Cosmic Horror Monthly felt like the story worked as a standalone and published it anyway. But it is the sequel.
great. Wonderful.
So,
Well, thank you so much, Mike. This is great. And
well,
I know you're a little
thank
bit
you for having me, Selena.
sorry.
I said thank you for having me.
Oh, oh, you're welcome. So, anyway, I know you're a little bit far to come in for to the store because you're in Virginia. Um, so
Maybe we can arrange something at some point.
at some point, maybe when you come to a Bosco or ReaderCon or something.
Right.
But yeah, but it was great having you. And so, Mike Allen, we will be talking. Okay,
Thank you so
thank
much.
you. Bye.
Bye bye.